Welcome. I am Gui Valente and this is Valente Brothers TV.
Well, Jiu-Jitsu comes from the Japanese samurai. So, by necessity, they had to practice a very complete system of fighting for the battlefield. So when it arrived in Brazil, it still had a lot of that feel, a traditional feel where everything needed to be tested and techniques could not be limited. Everything was for a real confrontation with no rules, and you should be able to use these techniques against any opponent, even much bigger and stronger. The Gracie brothers, with their Scottish blood, they really embraced this philosophy, and they were very happy to learn this system, not being gifted of great physical size or strength, but gifted with great courage to be able not only to learn this system, but then to give themselves the mission of proving its effectiveness and fighting opponents of much greater strength, especially Grandmaster Hélio. He faced opponents that were twice his size to prove the effectiveness of Jiu-Jitsu as a complete system of fighting. He also fought many Japanese grapplers, judo representatives, also to establish the respect of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil as compared to the Japanese, because at the time there was this notion that only the Japanese really knew Jiu-Jitsu. And they wanted to establish that in Brazil, the Jiu-Jitsu they were practicing was as good or even better than the one practiced in Japan. I think we learn Ju, you know, and a lot of people, they put too much emphasis in the words. The words are really not important. Jigoro Kano, he was a student of Jiu-Jitsu, and then to separate his art from other Jiu-Jitsu schools, instead of Jiu-Jitsu, he called it Judo. But if you understand the word, the Ju is really the important part of the word, which means yielding flexibility, using your opponent's strength against him rather than fighting strength against strength. Jitsu means art. All the samurai arts were finished with the word jitsu. So you had for different arts, different jitsus. You had, for example, swimming was sui jitsu, as an example. Jigoro Kano changed from jitsu to do, because he felt that do represented not just a technique, an art, but also a way of life.
Like Bushido.
Like the code of Bushido, exactly. And so he called it Judo. But when he changed the name, people were used to the name Jiu-Jitsu. So, especially around the world, where Jiu-Jitsu was already famous. So I'm sure that when Maeda came to Brazil, he wanted to use the word that people knew. And he used the word Jiu-Jitsu. But at the time, Jiu-Jitsu and Judo were synonyms, with absolutely no difference. Judo being the modern style of Jiu-Jitsu not created, but put together by Jigoro Kano.
And the Japanese that would come to Brazil, even Kimura and other representatives, they viewed the Gracies at the time as practitioners of Judo.
Exactly. They just thought that in Brazil they were still using the old name, but they didn't really see any difference as far as what they were practicing, because they knew it had exactly the same origin and the same root.
And some of the hints we've had over time of why this was the case, and today we're not using the name Brazilian Judo or Gracie Judo, instead we use Jiu-Jitsu, is probably because they felt back in the 30s that Judo, the new name, was being more used for sportive competition.
Exactly, because if you look at the time when Jigoro Kano created the name Judo, they were still practicing a more complete system, no question about it. But when the Judo name arrived in Brazil, which was probably in the late 30s, then Jigoro Kano was already involved with the International Olympic Committee, and even other elements of the Kodokan were already pushing more for a competitive practice of Judo. And so the Gracies felt that, and there are several of interviews of Carlos and Helio at the time criticizing what they saw as Judo, as the new Jiu-Jitsu, as being something that was limited and not complete in scope. And that was really the most important difference that the Gracies pointed out between their system and Judo and other styles of martial arts, was that while other styles only focus on one element of fighting, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu focused on every single element of hand-to-hand combat. Stand up and ground, grappling, throwing, and striking.
So it's fair to say that Jiu-Jitsu is a complete martial art.
It's the original MMA. It's the combination of ground and stand-up, striking, takedowns, and grappling. Yeah, because of the rules. The rules limited striking, and the rules, the way they were designed, they favor ground fighting, which the Gracies always felt was really one of the most important elements of fighting, especially when fighting somebody much bigger and stronger. But the problem is that when you created that, and with people's competitive spirit, they started forgetting everything else that was not part of the rules, part of the tournaments, and now you see people who think that Jiu-Jitsu is exclusively for the ground, for grappling, but you remember very well that we were 3, 4, 5-year-old boys, and Grandmaster Helio was already teaching us how to throw elbow strikes, how to throw knee strikes, how to throw kicks and punches and different striking techniques, a big emphasis on throwing techniques, where Master Helio was an expert in throwing techniques. He really, one of his favorite throws was hanegoshi. So there's a lot of misinformation, people believing that elements of striking and throwing came to Jiu-Jitsu later. They've been a part of this since the time of Grandmasters Carlos and Helio Gracie, and something that they really valued for creating this complete sense of confidence in Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. No, you cannot say that one is better than the other. They just have different objectives and a different focus. There's absolutely nothing wrong with practicing Jiu-Jitsu as a sport. And it's a sport with great benefits for the individuals who practice it, and people should be able to decide how they want to practice and with what focus they want to practice. We believe that when you practice Jiu-Jitsu for self-defense, then you need to have a complete approach. You need to fight, be able to fight standing up and on the ground. You need to be able to grapple, to strike, and to throw. Fight starts standing up, so you need to have a very complete sense of self-defense standing up. You need to be able to understand how to deal with different weapons, the knife, the gun, the stick, different situations. You need to understand the mindset for dealing with these situations when somebody's armed with a weapon, not armed with a weapon. What we believe is unfair is for Jiu-Jitsu to be branded as an art that is only teaching sports grappling, and for people to come out and say that Jiu-Jitsu would not be able to help you in a situation where you are hostage and somebody's holding a gun to your head, or a situation where there are multiple opponents. We've learned strategies, and this was part of the Gracie curriculum and what was taught at the Gracie Academy for all these situations. Not just physical techniques, but the mindset that you should have to deal with these situations. And we know so many stories of so many Gracies and students who have been able to successfully defend themselves and survive based on their knowledge, their exclusive knowledge of Jiu-Jitsu, including our dad, Grandmaster Pedro Valente, who in 2 different occasions throughout his life, he was able to disarm attackers, assailants who were pointing a gun at him because of his knowledge of Jiu-Jitsu. And he's not the only one. There's so many stories that we heard against knives, against weapons, against multiple opponents. So we are very confident in our belief that Jiu-Jitsu as a method of self-defense is complete and is the most powerful and effective martial arts in the world. And this is in no way disrespecting any of the other styles. We respect every martial art and we believe all of them have good things to offer. But we are very confident in Jiu-Jitsu, especially because of this completeness that is in its nature from the beginning. Was known to have great hands and actually to spar boxers with boxing gloves, no grappling, only punches, and many times knock them out and do very well.
In using the precision and the timing aspect of Jiu-Jitsu.
Exactly, the skills that he learned through Jiu-Jitsu, which include elements of boxing.
He often told us that maybe he was not the most offensive fighter, but he knew when to strike. He had a very good notion of distance.
Exactly. And which helped him a lot in his Vale Tudo fights, but even allowed him to spar boxers with basically boxing rules. Also, he had a Japanese friend named Tada, who was an expert in judo, and they practiced many, many times in Teresópolis, and he was able, within this practice, to really hone his throwing skills and develop into a very good throwing techniques expert, even able to go to a judo tournament in 1937 in São Paulo, and he was able to take the second place, not on the ground, not using grappling, only the throwing element. So defeating many of the Japanese black belts in throwing techniques. So before 1967, Jiu-Jitsu was complete. After 1967, many people started focusing more on the sport and, understandably so, spending more time practicing the grappling and ignoring a lot of the stand-up elements of Jiu-Jitsu, self-defense elements of Jiu-Jitsu, to the point where a lot of people today don't even know these elements exist.
Well, thank you very much, Pedro, and we'll continue to talk some more.
Thank you.